Aliens thought she was just a medic. Then she rewrote the rules of war. Before they retreat, comment if you believe they came to rule but met their reckoning. Enjoy the story. Commander Trenvac's 4 compound eyes tracked every movement on Halo 7's sprawling docking bay, his rigid Kalari frame maintaining the perfect military posture that had been drilled into him over 3 decades of service. The crimson insignia on his shoulder pulsed with each heartbeat, a biological display of his rank in the Galactic War Coalition that represented not just authority, but the blood of enemies spilled and comrades saved. Everything had its place, its color, its precise meaning in the hierarchy that kept civilization functioning. His species had perfected military organization over millennia. Purple for Supreme Command, crimson for Fleet Command, azure for tactical divisions, amber for logistics. Each hue represented earned authority, tested competence, proven loyalty. The system was elegant, efficient, unbreakable. Then the Earth transport arrived, and Vak's understanding of military order began to crumble. Disorganized, Vak muttered into his personal recorder, watching humans stumble down the ramp like larvae, emerging from their birthing pods. No formation, no synchronized movement, no apparent hierarchy beyond crude fabric patches sewn onto their uniforms. Weak, pale creatures that looked barely capable of surviving their own gravity, let alone the brutal realities of interstellar warfare against the hegemony forces. The humans moved with what Kalari scholars had termed chaotic individualism, each soldier making independent decisions, clustering in small groups, gesticulating wildly with primitive single-digit appendages. It violated every principle of military efficiency that Vak held sacred, but it was the woman in white who caught his attention and held it like a gravitational field. Doctor. Elise Morgan stepped off the transport with unhurried confidence, her pristine white coat unmarked by any military insignia that Vak could identify through his comprehensive database of Earth military structures. She didn't salute Admiral Reyes, who stood waiting in full ceremonial dress, didn't report to the commanding officer, didn't even acknowledge the formal greeting protocols established by the Coalition Standardization Committee after 18 months of careful diplomatic negotiations. Instead, she grabbed a steaming cup of something dark from a passing service bot, an action that would have resulted in immediate disciplinary action for any Kalari soldier breaking formation, and walked directly toward the medical command center with the purposeful stride of someone who knew exactly where they belonged. "Ma'am!" A Kalari lieutenant called out, his yellow rank indicators flashing with protocol urgency that any civilized being should recognize. "You must report for formal foop." "Not now," Dr. Morgan replied without breaking stride, her voice carrying that peculiar human quality that somehow demanded attention without raising volume or shifting into command frequencies. "I've got wounded to assess." Vak's mandibles clicked in disapproval, a sound his aide had learned meant the commander was witnessing something that defied logical categorization. Humans. He recorded in his daily observations log, appear incapable of following basic military structure. Subject exhibits flagrant disregard for chain of command, ignores rank protocols, and prioritizes undefined duties over formal procedures. Admiral Reyes watched the exchange with what humans called a smile, that bizarre facial contortion they used to indicate positive emotions. When the Kalari lieutenant approached him, visibly agitated and seeking clarification on proper response protocols, Reyes simply shrugged another distinctly human gesture that conveyed information through physical movement, rather than proper communication channels. "That's Doc Morgan," Reyes said, his tone carrying an odd mixture of respect and amusement. "She doesn't need permission to save lives." The words made no sense to Vak. Authority without rank command, without color-coded hierarchy. It violated everything the Kalari understood about proper military organization. Everything that had allowed their species to build an empire spanning 47 star systems, through precise, disciplined, unquestionable order. Vak studied Dr. Morgan through his enhanced optical sensors as she disappeared into the medical complex. Her movements were economical, purposeful, but lacked the rigid precision of proper military bearing. She moved like someone who had never learned to follow orders, yet somehow commanded absolute attention from every human in her vicinity. What strange authority does this Doc claim to possess? What invisible rank system do humans employ that supersedes visible hierarchy? The questions gnawed at Vak's analytical mind like acid-consuming metal. In his 43 years of military service, he had never encountered a command structure that operated on principles he couldn't decode and categorize. 3 standard cycles into the joint operation, Deputy Commander Ziltan had made his position crystal clear to anyone within range of his amplified voice frequencies. The old Kaluri warriors' deep purple rank markings spoke of decades of service, countless battles won through discipline and hierarchy survival, through adherence to proven systems that had kept the Kaluri Empire intact for 3,000 years. His scarred exoskeleton bore the ritual markings of the Vrex campaign, the Sigma Rebellion, and the brutal suppression of the Zeta Uprising. Each mark represented not just victory, but perfect execution of military doctrine. Ziltan embodied everything the Kaluri military system had achieved: order through structure, victory through discipline, strength through unity. These humans, Ziltan declared during the morning briefing, his voice resonating with the authority of absolute conviction, contaminate proper military order like a virus corrupting clean data streams. Look at this medical officer, no rank, no respect for protocol, no understanding of her place in the command structure. The briefing room, designed to accommodate both species, hummed with translation algorithms and atmospheric processors. Holographic displays showed tactical formations, resource allocations, and threat assessments. Everything organized, categorized, properly labeled, according to coalition standards. Dr. Morgan had just entered the briefing room, her white coat somehow bright despite the station's recycled lighting that gave everything else a dull institutional glow. She carried her ever-present coffee, a human stimulant addiction that Vak had documented extensively, and a datapad covered in what he now recognized as medical readings that seemed to change, constantly defying the static perfection of military reports. She moved through the room like she owned it, not in the aggressive manner of a conquest, but with the quiet confidence of someone who belonged wherever life needed saving. Officers stepped aside without thinking, creating a path that led directly to the central holographic display. "Admiral," she interrupted, not waiting for permission to speak, not acknowledging the formal protocols that governed military briefings, not even glancing at the agenda displayed prominently on every screen. "We need to halt today's atmospheric training exercise. The air filtration system is showing unstable biochemical readings." Admiral Reyes looked up from his tactical display, his human features showing what Vak had learned to interpret as concern mixed with frustration. "Doc, we've got 200 troops ready to deploy. The hegemony forces won't wait for perfect atmospheric conditions, and we can't delay training every time. The filters are cycling toxins, Dr. Ayes." Morgan's voice cut through the room like a surgical instrument, precise and uncompromising. "Proceed with this exercise, and half those troops will be unconscious within the hour. The other half will be dead within 3. The room fell silent, except for the steady hum of life support systems and the barely audible whisper of translation algorithms processing increasingly tense exchanges. Vak watched fascinated as human and Kaluri officers processed this direct challenge to established authority. Ziltan's rank indicators flared bright purple, a biological warning sign that every Kaluri recognized as immediate fury. "This is precisely what I mean," he declared, rising from his position with the deliberate menace of a predator preparing to strike. "Military decisions cannot be disrupted by civilian contractors who refuse to understand basic command structure. We have protocols for environmental safety. We have specialists assigned to atmospheric monitoring. We have soldiers who are about to die." Dr. Morgan's eyes met Ziltan's four-eyed glare without flinching, without showing the proper deference that any rational being should display when confronted by a superior officer. "Deputy Commander, with respect, dead soldiers can't win battles." The silence that followed was so complete that Vak could hear his own circulatory system pumping fluid through his extremities. Admiral Reyes studied his datapad with the intensity of someone decoding enemy communications, then looked up with the expression humans wore when making difficult decisions. "Exercise postponed," he announced, his voice carrying across the room with finality. "Morgan, what do you need to get those filters operational?" Vak watched in fascination as the highest-ranking officers in the room deferred to someone wearing no rank at all. Ziltan's mandibles ground together audibly, a sound that in Kalari society indicated barely controlled rage at a fundamental violation of natural order. Humans, Vach noted privately in his research log, appear to have developed an authority structure that operates outside conventional military hierarchy. Subject demonstrates ability to override established command decisions through assertion of specialized knowledge. Further observation required to understand mechanisms of influence. But privately, as he watched Dr. Morgan coordinate atmospheric repairs with the efficiency of a seasoned commander, Vach was beginning to wonder something that challenged everything he thought he knew about leadership. What if the humans understood something about command that the Kalari had missed? What if their seemingly chaotic system actually contained a deeper logic that his species had failed to recognize? The thought was heretical. It was also becoming impossible to ignore. The alarm screamed through Halo 7 at 0347 hours, its piercing wail cutting through the artificial night cycle like a blade through flesh. Red emergency lights bathed the corridors in blood-colored shadows as Vach rushed to his station, his training taking over with the automatic precision of 3 decades in service. This was no drill. The chemical sensors had detected a massive biotoxin leak in Supply Bay Gamma, the kind of contamination that could turn a space station into a floating tomb within minutes. His enhanced optical sensors immediately shifted to tactical mode, overlaying threat assessments and evacuation protocols onto his visual field. Standard operating procedure for toxin containment: immediate evacuation to safe zones, atmospheric isolation, decontamination protocols. Simple, efficient, proven through countless simulations and real-world applications. All personnel. Admiral Reyes's voice boomed through the comm system with the authority of absolute command. Immediate evacuation through the main corridor. Move upwind to avoid contamination spread. This is not a drill. Repeat. Belay that order. Dr. Morgan's voice cut across the comm channel with surgical precision transmitted on emergency frequencies that automatically overrode all other communications. Vach's breath caught in his throat. Interrupting a fleet admiral during an emergency was tantamount to mutiny in Kalari military law, punishable by exile or death, depending on the severity of consequences. Admiral, the main corridor runs directly past the chemical storage facility. Dr. Morgan's voice remained steady, despite the chaos erupting around them, despite the fact that she was committing what any reasonable military tribunal would consider treason. You're sending troops into the poison cloud. All personnel evacuation route Charlie through the maintenance tunnels. Now? For a moment that felt like an eternity. Time seemed suspended in the toxic amber of indecision. 200 soldiers, human and Kalari alike, stood frozen between conflicting orders, their training warring with survival instinct. In that instant, Vach understood he was witnessing something unprecedented in military history. A direct challenge to admiral-level authority during active crisis by someone with no official rank whatsoever. The maintenance tunnels were smaller, more difficult, not designed for mass evacuation. They would slow the evacuation increase, panic violate every established protocol. They were also, Vach realized with growing horror, the only route that didn't lead directly through the contamination zone. Admiral Reyes spoke first, his voice cutting through the chaos with decision born of battlefield experience. You heard Doc. Route Charlie. Move it. The evacuation that followed was unlike anything in Vach's extensive military experience. Dr. Morgan positioned herself at a central junction like a battlefield commander directing traffic with calm efficiency that seemed to create order from chaos through sheer force of competence. She carried no weapon, wore no rank, yet soldiers moved at her command with absolute confidence that bordered on religious faith. Kalari squads, your biology processes the toxin slower than human systems. She called out, somehow managing to coordinate cross-species medical needs while simultaneously distributing antidote injections with mechanical precision. You escort the human evacuees. Human medics start triage at checkpoint 7. Anyone showing respiratory distress gets priority transport. Vach found himself following her orders before his conscious mind could object, his body responding to authority that bypassed rational analysis and went straight to survival instinct. Her command presence felt different from military hierarchy, not demanding obedience through fear or structure, but earning it through demonstrated competence and absolute focus on keeping people alive. Private Liam Hart, A young human recruit, barely out of basic training, stumbled past with 3 Kellery soldiers he was helping evacuate. Blood seeped through his uniform where the toxin had contacted his skin. But he never stopped moving, never abandoned his charges, never asked for relief. The sight struck Vak as distinctly human, illogical sacrifice in service of others. "Hart!" Dr. Morgan called out, her voice sharp with medical concern. "Get yourself to medical. That's direct contamination." "Not until these guys are safe." "Doc," Hart replied, his voice strained but determined, blood frothing at the corners of his mouth. "They can't see the warning signs in the tunnels. Need someone to guide them." "Doctor." Morgan's expression shifted, and for the first time Vak saw something beyond professional medical authority. He saw someone who understood the true cost of every decision, who carried the weight of every life in her hands, like a physical burden. "Then let's keep everyone safe," she said quietly, but her voice carried clearly through the comm system. "Together." When authority comes from wisdom rather than rank, how do you argue with someone trying to save your life? The evacuation continued with mechanical efficiency, but Vak couldn't shake the image of Private Hart bleeding for soldiers he'd never met, or Dr. Morgan coordinating a crisis that should have killed dozens without losing a single life. Something fundamental was shifting in his understanding of power authority and what it meant to command. The evacuation should have been complete within 20 minutes. Standard protocol executed perfectly according to emergency response manuals written in the blood of previous disasters. But as the final squad reached the safe zone, their bio readings flashing green on the command center's monitoring systems, Dr. Morgan's portable scanner detected something that changed everything. Containment breach in Section C. She announced, her voice steady, despite the implications that sent ice through Vak's circulatory system. "The toxin is spreading faster than our models predicted. We've got airborne dispersal moving toward the main life support intake." The words hit the command center like a physical blow. Section C housed the primary atmospheric processors for the entire station. If the toxin reached the intake valves, it would spread through every corridor, every room, every life support system. 3,000 personnel would die slowly, painfully, as their own air became poison. Private Hart, already weakened from exposure, his skin showing the telltale discoloration of systemic toxin absorption, stepped forward with the determination of someone who had made peace with death. "Doc, someone needs to manually seal the contamination doors from the inside. I can reach the controls, but—" "Absolutely not." Dr. Morgan cut him off, her voice carrying absolute medical authority. "You're already showing signs of systemic poisoning. Your neurological function is compromised. You go in there, you die." But Hart was already moving, his training overriding his body's protests, his human stubbornness refusing to acknowledge biological limitations. "With respect, Doc, those doors won't seal themselves. And if that poison hits life support, we're all dead anyway." Vak watched from the command center as Hart staggered toward the contamination zone, his movements increasingly unsteady as the toxin attacked his nervous system. The young human's vitals, displayed on the medical monitor in stark red warnings, painted a grim picture: blood toxicity, rising organ function, declining neurological activity, becoming erratic. Through the observation window, Vak could see the contamination spreading like a living thing, creeping through corridors with malevolent purpose. The manual controls for the emergency bulkheads were located in the center of the contamination zone, requiring someone to manually operate the sealing mechanisms while surrounded by lethal atmospheric toxins. "Hart, stand down!" Admiral Reyes commanded through the comm, his voice carrying the absolute authorities of Fleet Command. "That's a direct order, soldier." "Can't do that, sir," Hart replied, reaching the manual controls with movements that looked increasingly like a man fighting underwater. "These doors need someone who can think past the poison. Doc's orders were to contain the spread. I'm containing the spread." Vak watched, fascinated and horrified, as Hart began the complex sequence of manual operations required to seal the contamination bulkheads. Each movement required precise coordination, mathematical thinking, sustained concentration, all while toxins attacked his brain tissue and destroyed his motor functions. Dr. Morgan's face had gone pale, but her voice remained controlled with the iron discipline of someone who had made life and death decisions for years. "Hart, listen to me carefully. Activate the containment sequence, then get to the emergency medical station immediately. I've got counteragents standing by. That's a direct order." "Roger that, Doc," Hart replied, his voice increasingly slurred as the toxin affected his speech centers. "Sealing bulkheads now." The doors sealed with a mechanical finality that echoed through the comm system like the closing of a tomb. Hart's vital signs spiked as his body fought the poison, then began dropping rapidly as organs started shutting down. Through the observation window, Vok could see the young soldier collapse against the sealed door, his job complete, his life ebbing away in service to people he barely knew. Dr. Morgan didn't hesitate. She grabbed an emergency medical kit that weighed nearly as much as she did and headed for the contamination zone, her white coat billowing behind her like a banner of defiance against death itself. "Morgan, no." Admiral Reyes blocked her path, his face showing the kind of fear that Vok had rarely seen in human expressions. "You can't go in there. The risk to you, to the mission." Admiral, Dr. Morgan's voice carried something Vok had never heard from a human before. Absolute uncompromising authority that made even admiral rank seem insignificant. "Move. Now." The command in her voice was so absolute, so fundamentally unquestionable, that Reyes stepped aside without conscious thought. Vok realized he was witnessing something beyond military hierarchy, beyond rank and protocol. He was seeing raw human will made manifest. What happened next would haunt Vok for the rest of his military career. Dr. Morgan entered the contamination zone without protective gear, carrying only her medical kit and the absolute determination to save a life. She administered emergency treatment to Hart through her own exposure, somehow managing to stabilize both of them long enough for the full hazmat team to extract them. As they carried Hart to the medical bay, barely conscious but alive, his toxin-clouded eyes found Dr. Morgan. "Did we save them, Doc?" he whispered through damaged vocal cords. "We saved them," she replied, her white coat now stained with both their blood, her own voice beginning to show signs of toxin exposure. "All of them." Ziltan, who had watched the entire incident in stunned silence, turned to Vak with something approaching religious awe in his four eyes. "Commander," he said slowly, "I believe I have been wrong about these humans. Fundamentally, completely wrong." Vak nodded, still processing what he had witnessed. Authority without rank. Command through sacrifice. A warrior in a white coat who fought death itself instead of enemies who inspired loyalty through demonstrated care rather than fear or protocol. "Deputy Commander, he." Vak replied, his voice carrying new understanding. "I believe we all have." In that moment, rank meant nothing. Only one thing mattered: the person willing to risk everything for others. The memorial service for the near casualties of the toxin incident marked a fundamental turning point in the Galactic War Coalition that would echo through military academies for generations and fundamentally reshape how different species understood cooperation under pressure. As Vok stood among the assembled troops, human and Kaleri, shoulder to shoulder in a formation that would have been impossible weeks earlier, he noticed something unprecedented that challenged every assumption about interspecies military cooperation and hierarchy. Kaleri soldiers were asking Dr. Morgan for medical advice, not requesting permission through proper channels, not following established chain of command, not filing requisitions through the appropriate bureaucratic channels that had been established through months of careful diplomatic negotiation between species with fundamentally different approaches to authority and decision-making. Simply walking up to someone they trusted with their lives and seeking guidance based on demonstrated competence rather than official position. "Doc." A senior Kaleri sergeant approached Dr. Morgan after the ceremony, his rank indicators displaying the deep blue of a 20-year veteran, someone whose service record included campaigns that younger soldiers only heard about in training scenarios and whose survival spoke to both skill and luck. "My squad's been having respiratory issues since the contamination exposure. Standard protocol says we're fit for duty according to all official medical assessments, but..." His voice trailed off, and Vok realized he was witnessing something that shouldn't have been possible according to everything he understood about Kaleri military psychology. A senior soldier acknowledging that official protocol might be wrong, that someone outside the established command structure might know better than officially designated specialists and their carefully calibrated testing procedures. but you know your bodies better than any protocol manual. Dr. Morgan finished pulling out her portable scanner with movements that had become as familiar to the troops as their own weapons and equipment. Let me take a look at what's actually happening inside your systems. Admiral Reyes watched the interaction with the same bemused expression Vak had seen humans wear when observing Kellery mating rituals, fascination mixed with complete lack of understanding, as if he were witnessing something that violated fundamental assumptions about how authority and hierarchy should function. His species had never developed the rigid hierarchy that defined Kellery society, but they had their own command structures, their own rules about authority, and proper channels for requesting assistance. Dr. Morgan ran her scanner over the Kellery sergeant with professional efficiency, her readings instantly displaying on the device's screen in patterns that meant nothing to Vak, but clearly told her everything she needed to know about the soldier's condition, internal damage, and long-term prognosis. Your respiratory efficiency is down 30% from baseline readings, she announced, her voice carrying the kind of certainty that came from years of medical training and extensive experience with toxin exposure cases. The chemical exposure created microscarring in your lung tissue that's interfering with gas exchange. You're functional, but you're working twice as hard to process oxygen, which means you'll fatigue faster and have reduced endurance. Admiral, Dr. Morgan called out after examining the entire Kellery squad, her voice carrying across the memorial area, with casual authority that somehow didn't seem to challenge existing hierarchy so much as supplement it. I need to modify tomorrow's assault plans based on these medical findings. The gathered officers fell silent, except for the omnipresent hum of life support systems. Vak's mandibles clicked involuntarily as the implications hit him like a physical blow. Assault plans were the sacred domain of tactical command, developed by specialists trained in warfare theory, refined through computer simulations and battlefield experience accumulated over decades of conflict. Medical officers provided casualty estimates and evacuation plans. They didn't modify strategic operations or suggest tactical changes. Go ahead, Doc, Admiral Reyes said, though Vak detected uncertainty in his voice for the first time since the human had arrived at Halo 7, suggesting that even he wasn't entirely sure how to handle this unprecedented situation. These Kellery soldiers have compromised respiratory efficiency from the toxin exposure. Dr. Morgan explained, her datapad displaying biological readings that painted a complex picture of interspecies physiology and the long-term effects of chemical contamination. They'll perform at 60% capacity in a standard atmosphere assault, which means their liability in conventional operations where they can't keep up with normal tactical requirements. Ziltan's rank indicators flashed dangerously purple, the biological warning that every Kellery recognized as barely controlled fury at what appeared to be an insult to their military capabilities. But Dr. Morgan continued before he could voice his objections. But if we modify the attack to utilize their enhanced low oxygen tolerance, they become our most effective advance unit, she said, manipulating the tactical display with the confidence of someone who understood both biology and warfare in ways that transcended traditional specialization boundaries. Kellery can operate in atmospheric conditions that would incapacitate humans within minutes. Instead of treating their current condition as a limitation, we use it as a strategic advantage that gives us capabilities the enemy won't expect. Ziltan stepped forward, his earlier hostility replaced by something Vak couldn't quite identify, confusion, perhaps, or the beginning of respect for thinking that challenged assumptions while acknowledging, rather than dismissing, Kellery capabilities. Dr. Morgan, you're suggesting tactical decisions based on medical assessment rather than traditional strategic doctrine? I'm suggesting we use every advantage our soldiers possess instead of forcing them into roles that ignore their biological strengths. She replied, her voice carrying the quiet authority that Vak had come to recognize as distinctly human, not demanding obedience, but earning trust through demonstrated competence. Your biology isn't a limitation, Deputy Commander. It's a strategic asset we've been wasting through ignorance and adherence to protocols that don't account for interspecies cooperation. The assault plan that emerged over the next hour represented something entirely new in Kellery military experience tactics based on biological capabilities, rather than traditional hierarchical assignment strategy that treated different species as complementary assets rather than interchangeable units. Dr. Morgan coordinated with both human and Kalari command staff, her medical expertise in forming strategic decisions in ways that no military academy had ever taught or considered. "This is remarkable," Vac whispered to his aide watching as Dr. Morgan transformed apparent medical limitations into tactical advantages through pure analytical thinking that refused to accept conventional boundaries between disciplines. She's created a command structure based on capability optimization rather than rank authority treating warfare as a biological as well as tactical challenge. "Sir?" His aide replied, his own voice filled with the wonder of someone witnessing the impossible become practical. "She's treating the entire coalition like a patient. Diagnosis of strengths and weaknesses. Treatment plan for optimal function, long-term care to maintain capability." As the briefing concluded, Admiral Reyes approached Dr. Morgan with the expression humans wore when they had reached new understanding that challenged previous assumptions. "Doc, I have a confession. When they assigned you to this operation, I thought we were getting a medical officer who would patch up casualties and stay out of operational planning." "What do you think you got instead?" she asked, cleaning her scanner with the methodical precision Vac had come to associate with her work. Every movement economical and purposeful, as if she were conserving energy for the next crisis that would inevitably arise. "I think we got something the Galactic War has never seen before," Reyes replied, his voice carrying genuine admiration mixed with the bewilderment of someone whose fundamental assumptions had been challenged and found wanting. "A healer who fights battles we didn't even know we were losing. When you stop seeing rank and start seeing capability, every soldier becomes irreplaceable." Vac watched the humans and Kalari work together with new efficiency, their cooperation based not on protocol, but on mutual recognition of each other's strengths and limitations. Dr. Morgan had done something impossible according to everything he had been taught about interspecies relations. She had made them see each other as individuals rather than rank insignia, as capabilities rather than classifications, as partners rather than subordinates. The intelligence briefing that shattered Vac's understanding came from the most unexpected source imaginable: Dr. Morgan's own personnel file, buried deep in classified archives that required command-level clearance and revealed a past that recontextualized everything he thought he knew about the human medical officer who had transformed their entire approach to warfare and cooperation. As he reviewed the Coalition database 6 weeks after the toxin incident, driven by scientific curiosity to understand the mechanisms behind her unprecedented authority and the psychological factors that allowed her to command without rank, he discovered records that challenged every assumption about her background training and motivations. "Commander!" His aide approached with barely contained excitement, his rank indicators flashing with the rapid pulses that indicated urgent information requiring immediate attention from superior officers. "You need to see this data immediately. What we've discovered changes everything we thought we knew." The holographic display that materialized showed Dr. Morgan's complete Earth military record, not the civilian contractor profile she'd presented to Coalition Command, with its emphasis on medical training and humanitarian experience, but the classified file from the Terran Defense Force that required command-level clearance to access and painted a picture of someone whose experience went far beyond healing. Major Elise Morgan, former Chief Medical Officer, 101st Airborne Division, with combat deployments across 4 different war zones, combat veteran of the Martian colonial uprising that had claimed over 2 million lives in 3 years of brutal fighting, lead surgeon during the Viral 7 pandemic that killed 12 million humans across 4 worlds and nearly brought human civilization to its knees. Decorated for developing field medical protocols that reduced combat mortality by 43% during the bloodiest war in human history. Credited with innovations in battlefield medicine that had saved hundreds of thousands of lives. Winner of the Terran Cross for Valor, the highest military decoration humans awarded for courage under fire. She outranks half the human officers on this station. Vac breathed, his voice barely audible, as the implications cascaded through his analytical mind like a cascade failure in a computer system. And according to her service record, she has more combat experience than most of our tactical specialists. And according to this, his aide continued manipulating the display to show assignment records and personnel decisions that painted an even more complex picture. She specifically requested assignment as a civilian contractor. She refused promotion to colonel, twice declined assignment to the Pentagon Medical Command, and turned down an offer to head the Terran Defense Medical Academy. Ziltan entered the briefing room as they studied the files, the deputy commander's attitude toward Dr. Morgan having completely transformed since the toxin incident from suspicion and hostility to something approaching respect. But this revelation brought a new kind of awe to his expression, the look Callery wore when confronting something that challenged fundamental assumptions about reality itself. Why would a decorated military officer choose to serve without rank? Ziltan asked, his voice carrying genuine confusion that spoke to the core of Callery military psychology. In our society, such behavior would be considered a form of madness, a rejection of everything that gives life meaning and purpose. Vok was beginning to understand something that went deeper than military protocol, something that touched the core of human psychology and their unique approach to leadership and authority. Because rank creates barriers between the person giving orders and the people who must trust those orders with their lives, he said slowly, pieces clicking together in his mind like a complex puzzle revealing its pattern. Authority through hierarchy requires permission from superiors and creates distance from subordinates. Authority through competence requires only trust from the people you're trying to help. They found Dr. Morgan in the medical bay, training a mixed group of human and Callery medics in cross-species emergency response procedures that would have been impossible to imagine before the recent crisis. She moved between the trainees with the fluid precision of someone who had done this thousands of times in field hospitals, where artillery shells exploded overhead in combat zones, where the wounded arrived faster than they could be treated in plague wards, where a single mistake could kill everyone in the room. Her teaching method was unlike anything Vok had observed in Callery military education, which relied on rigid hierarchy and unquestioning obedience to proven procedures. Instead of lecturing from authority, she demonstrated through example. Instead of demanding memorization of procedures, she explained the reasoning behind each technique. Instead of creating hierarchy between teacher and student, she created partnership between healer and healer. Dr. Morgan, Vok interrupted respectfully, using the formal address that humans preferred in professional settings, while acknowledging the growing realization that she deserved far more respect than her apparent rank suggested. Might we speak privately? She looked up from a Callery cadet who was struggling with human anatomy charts, his four eyes having difficulty processing the alien arrangement of organs and blood vessels that defied everything his species had learned about biological organization. Give me 5 minutes to finish this lesson, Commander. Voltan here is about to have a breakthrough with human cardiovascular systems that will make him a better medic than half the specialists I've worked with. The casual way she deflected a senior commander's request while continuing to teach would have infuriated Vak 2 months ago. It would have violated every protocol about proper military deference, every assumption about rank and authority that governed civilized interaction between military personnel. Now, he simply waited watching as she transformed a confused cadet into a competent medic through patient instruction and unwavering faith in his ability to learn and grow. The key Sirkin, she was saying to the struggling cadet, her voice carrying the patience of someone who understood that knowledge was a gift to be shared, rather than a weapon to be hoarded, is understanding that human hearts are more centralized than Callery circulation systems. We pump everything through one organ instead of distributing the load across multiple pumping chambers. It's less efficient from an engineering standpoint, but it means you only need to focus on one critical point for emergency intervention. The cadet's eyes brightened with understanding, and Vok realized he was witnessing something remarkable knowledge being transferred, not through authority or intimidation, but through genuine desire to help another being succeed and become more capable. Now, she said, joining them in her office that was more like a combination laboratory and library than a traditional command space filled with medical texts from a dozen different species and research equipment that spoke to ongoing studies. What did you want to discuss? Your actual rank. Ziltan said with typical Callery directness that bypassed human social protocols and addressed the core issue without diplomatic niceties. Major Morgan. Dr. Morgan's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture, a subtle stiffening that suggested old wounds being probed, memories she preferred to leave buried. That was a different life, Deputy Commander. A different war, different priorities, different responsibilities. Why? Vak asked, genuinely curious about the psychology that would drive someone to abandon earned authority and the respect that came with military rank. Why give up the power you fought to achieve? She was quiet for a long moment, her hands wrapped around her omnipresent coffee cup, like it was an anchor to the present, a connection to something that kept her grounded in current reality rather than past trauma. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of decisions made in hospital corridors where people died while bureaucrats argued about jurisdiction and proper procedure. Command through rank requires soldiers to follow orders because they must, she said, finally, her voice carrying the certainty of someone who had learned painful lessons through direct experience. Command through competence requires soldiers to follow direction because they trust it will keep them alive. Which do you think saves more lives in a crisis? But the authority Ziltan began his Killary mind, struggling with concepts that violated fundamental assumptions about power structures and the natural order of things. Authority is just responsibility in disguise. Dr. Morgan interrupted her voice, carrying the certainty of someone who had paid the price for understanding. I wear this white coat because it represents something more important than rank or official position. It represents a promise that I will use everything I know, everything I've learned, everything I've experienced to bring people home alive. Vak studied her carefully, beginning to understand the deeper logic behind human military psychology and their unique approach to leadership under pressure. The Coalition doesn't know about your military background or your service record. The Coalition doesn't need to know, she replied, her voice firm but not defensive, carrying the confidence of someone who knew exactly who she was and what she was trying to accomplish. They need to know I'll fight for every soldier under my care regardless of species or rank. Military rank is about power over others. Medicine is about power to help others. I choose helping. But you could command entire fleets. Vak persisted, unable to comprehend the choice she had made to abandon power and influence. You could shape military policy, influence strategic decisions at the highest levels of command. Dr. Morgan smiled, and for the first time since he'd met her, Vak saw something almost sad in her expression, a weariness that spoke to experiences that had cost her more than she was willing to share. Commander, I've seen what happens when people like me get caught up in the power games of high command. We start thinking about statistics instead of soldiers, about acceptable losses instead of individual lives. The further you get from the people you're supposed to protect, the easier it becomes to sacrifice them for the greater good. Sometimes the strongest warriors are the ones who've learned to fight death instead of enemies. Vak left the meeting with his understanding of leadership fundamentally altered his assumptions about power and authority, challenged in ways that would reshape his entire approach to command. Dr. Morgan hadn't abandoned power. She had redefined it, choosing influence over command, trust over fear, healing over destruction. In a galaxy where authority came from rank and rank came from violence, she had built something entirely different: authority based on the absolute commitment to preserve life. 6 months after the Halo 7 incident, Commander Tren Vak stood before the newly constructed Galactic Memorial on Proxima Station, a crystalline monument that rose toward the artificial sky like a prayer made solid. The memorial commemorated the Battle of the Helix Nebula, where Coalition forces had finally broken the hegemony siege that had threatened 3 star systems and billions of lives. The first name carved into the monument's translucent surface wasn't a general admiral or fleet commander who had directed the battle from the safety of command ships. It wasn't a pilot who had destroyed enemy vessels or a soldier who had captured strategic positions. Dr. Elise Morgan, the healer who taught warriors how to win. The inscription was simple, understated, carved in the flowing script that humans used for their most sacred remembrances. But its placement at the apex of the memorial above the names of admirals and heroes spoke to something profound that had changed in the Galactic War, something that Vak was now tasked with explaining to a new generation of officers. Behind him, 47 cadets from 12 different species listened as Vak began his lecture at the Coalition Military Academy. His own rank indicators had changed over the months, now bearing white medical crosses alongside the traditional command colors, a hybrid designation that hadn't existed before. Dr. Morgan showed them that medicine and warfare weren't separate disciplines, but complementary aspects of the same commitment to preserving life. Military strength. Vok addressed the assembled cadets, his voice carrying the authority of hard-won wisdom earned through witnessing transformation, was once measured in firepower, fleet size, and tactical superiority. We counted victories and destroyed enemy vessels, captured territories, broken resistance movements. A young Killary cadet raised her appendage, her bright yellow indicators marking her as fresh from basic training. Commander, how did one medical officer change fundamental coalition strategy? Vak activated the holographic display that had become central to his curriculum, showing battle statistics from before and after Dr. Morgan's integration into coalition command structure. The numbers told a story that challenged everything military academies had taught for centuries. Casualty rates dropped 67%. He explained, manipulating the display to highlight the dramatic changes. Mission success rates increased 43%. Most remarkably, cross-species cooperation improved by measures we're still calculating, creating tactical capabilities that neither species possessed alone. But sir, another cadet interrupted this, one human, his species' natural irreverence for hierarchy, already evident in his tone. She held no command rank. How could she influence strategy without authority to issue orders? Cadet Vok replied, his voice carrying the patience of someone who had asked the same questions himself. Dr. Morgan proved that true command isn't about giving orders, it's about earning trust. When soldiers believe you'll bring them home alive, they'll follow you through any battle, face any enemy, overcome any obstacle. The lecture hall fell silent, except for the gentle hum of life support systems, as Vak displayed the final battle footage from the Helix Nebula. The images showed Dr. Morgan still in her white coat stained with the blood of a dozen species, coordinating medical evacuations, while simultaneously directing tactical support with the efficiency of someone who understood that war was ultimately about preserving the capacity to fight another day. No rank insignia adorned her coat. No military decorations marked her achievements. No formal authority granted her the right to override tactical commanders or redirect fleet movements. Yet there she was, at the center of the most complex military operation in galactic history, her authority absolute, because it was earned through demonstrated competence and unwavering commitment to every life under her care. The humans have a saying. Vok continued, his voice carrying new understanding of human wisdom that went deeper than their chaotic surface behavior. The person with no badge sometimes saves the army. Dr. Morgan taught us that power comes from ability and conviction, not position. Victory comes not from weapons, but from the people who keep us alive to fight. As the cadets filed out, chattering in a dozen languages about medical authority and battlefield medicine, about authority without rank and command through competence, Vok remained at the memorial. Admiral Reyes approached his own uniform, now bearing medical advisory insignia, that represented a fundamental shift in how the coalition understood military leadership. Regrets about documenting the whole thing? Reyes asked, noting Vok's contemplative posture as he stared at the memorial's inscription. Regrets. Vok clicked his mandibles in what humans had taught him was amusement, a sound that once indicated aggression, but now conveyed something closer to joy. Admiral, studying Dr. Morgan was the most important research of my career. She didn't just change how we practice medicine, she changed how we understand leadership itself. A message appeared on Vok's datapad, the soft chime indicating priority communication from Coalition Command. Dr. Morgan, now Chief Medical Coordinator for the entire Coalition fleet, was requesting his assistance with new cross-species medical protocols that would standardize trauma care across 47 different biological systems. Still just docked to her patients, Vak noted, with something approaching human fondness, an emotional response that his species rarely experienced toward other beings. That's what makes her irreplaceable, Reyes replied, his voice carrying the respect of someone who had witnessed transformation. She could have any rank she wanted, any position in the command structure, any honor the Coalition could bestow. Instead, she chose the one that matters most. As they walked toward the medical center, passing monuments to generals and admirals, whose names would fade with time, Vok reflected on the profound lessons learned. In the great sci-fi stories of military transformation, heroes were usually discovered through battlefield valor or tactical brilliance, through moments of singular courage that changed the course of wars. But sometimes the greatest victories came from someone in a white coat who simply refused to let people die. Dr. Elise Morgan had rewritten the rules of war by teaching warriors that saving lives was the ultimate victory, that strength came not from the ability to destroy enemies, but from the capacity to preserve allies. She had shown them that in a universe where death was the inevitable end of all conflicts, the only meaningful triumph was keeping people alive long enough to see peace. The Galactic War continued its battles fought across 1,000 worlds, its casualties counted in millions. But it was no longer the same conflict that had begun years ago, with species fighting separately, each convinced that their way of war was superior. Now it was fought by an alliance that understood a fundamental truth that would echo through military academies for generations. The greatest warriors aren't those who destroy enemies, they're those who preserve allies. True leadership isn't about the rank you hold, it's about the trust you earn through every decision you make. If this story moved, you share it with someone who needs to hear that their value doesn't depend on their title, but on their character. Like and subscribe for more stories that prove the most powerful weapon is often compassion wielded with absolute determination. What's your Doc Morgan story? Tell us about someone whose real authority came from their competence and caring, not their position in the hierarchy. Share it in the comments below.